Welcome into the Action Network podcast presented by BetMGM. Brendan Glasheen in the host chair. Billy Ward and Sean Zerillo are standing by. We'll be providing UFC Fight Night best bets. We've got Perez and Taira on the main event for this week at the Apex in Las Vegas. But first, before we go to those guys, we go to the hotline for boxing. Brian Fonseca joins us to break down a couple of title fights on the boxing card this week. Brian, thanks for stopping by. He's one of our Action Network boxing contributors. 2 world title fights live on pay-per-view Saturday night at 8 Eastern. We've got Gervonta Davis taking on Frank Martin in the main event, and then we also have David Benavidez and Alexander Gvozdyk contributing to our breakdowns here. Brian's joining us. So, Brian, I'll let you take it away here. Maybe a best bet on each of these fights, please.
Yeah, for Gervonta Davis versus Frank Martin, this one's a little tough from the standpoint of just betting. Gervonta Davis is almost absolutely going to win this fight. Frank Martin is good, but this is sort of an A-level fighter versus a B-level fighter. Sometimes this happens. Actually, in boxing, a lot of times this happens. And Frank Martin, while undefeated, hasn't fought anyone at Gervonta Davis's level, even though he would maintain that Gervonta Davis hasn't beaten anybody. I think Gervonta Davis ultimately gets this done late. He's a slow starter. This is his first fight since last April when he beat Ryan Garcia in a very high-profile bout in 2023. And this is his first fight in over a year. Frank Martin also hasn't fought in close to a year, and his last win was a questionable one. He got a favorable decision, we'll say. Not that he didn't deserve to win the fight, but it was at least controversial, the decision. So I think Gervonta Davis is going to get started late in this fight. He is not somebody who finishes guys early unless they're so overmatched, but he will catch them between rounds 7 through 12. In my estimation, I bet that at plus 135 at one book. He tends to get guys later on. Ryan Garcia was round 7. Hector Luis Garcia before that was round 9. He actually retired on his stool. And I think Frank Martin, has some survival tactics, and it's going to be interesting how he sort of survives because he's not somebody who's a big volume puncher. So I think Gervonta Davis is going to figure out ways to close the gap and then ultimately finish him.
And that's another, your angle of going about it. It seems a better way than having to lay minus 700 on the money line, which is his current price as we record Friday morning. Okay, let's go to the other one.
Co-feature, David Benavidez, Alexander Gvozdyk. David Benavidez is someone who's drawing a lot of excitement. Like when they bring him out to these events, he gets probably the biggest pop because he's an action fighter. He has ridiculous stamina. People think he can beat Canelo Alvarez. I'm probably one of those people at this point. He's moving up to light heavyweight because he got very impatient with Canelo Alvarez waiting for a fight at super middleweight. So he's fighting Alexander Gvozdyk, who his only loss was to Artur Beterbiev in 2019. That was by stoppage. Gvozdyk was actually winning that fight on 2 scorecards by the time he was stopped in round 10. He was being trained by Teddy Atlas, who had a great game plan for that fight. But Gvozdyk was ultimately stopped in round 10, ran out of gas after boxing really, really well the first 10 rounds, and that was a very close fight. So after that, the issue is he took a few years off, came back. He's on a winning streak now, but I think David Benavidez is going to get this done late as well. However, I prefer betting the over here. It's 8.5. He was stopped in the 10th against Beterbiev. David Benavidez, I thought he was going to knock out Caleb Plant. He didn't. I thought he was going to box Demetrius Andrade to a decision. He did not. He knocked him out in the 6th round. So maybe not quote me on this one, but I do think this is going to go over because Gvozdyk is a very skilled boxer who is going to be able to survive in there. And David Benavidez, what's going to help him out is his stamina and things of that nature. His speed for somebody that big is pretty ridiculous, but he's not somebody who puts guys away super early unless, kind of like Gervonta Davis, they're so overmatched, and I don't think this is that case. So I think Gvozdyk is actually more live as a dog here than Frank Martin, which is another reason why I'm more comfortable taking the over than a straight up method of victory. So I'll go over 8.5 rounds. I found that at like minus 142 in one book.
Is it playable to 9.5 rounds if it's moved to 9.5 at even money? Over 9.5 even money.
I'd probably still take that. That's probably like my limit because 10.5, you're only giving me 2 rounds there. But being that he was stopped in the 10th round by a harder puncher in Artur Beterbiev, like Beterbiev now is probably pound for pound in boxing the hardest puncher in the sport. He's ridiculous. and Vosdick was able to withstand his power for 10 rounds. So I think he should be able to get to 10 with Benavidez, and it wouldn't surprise me if this just straight up went to the cards.
2 world title fights live on pay-per-view Saturday night. Any final thoughts, Brian, before we let you go?
There is another fight, but we don't need to prolong MMA talk here.
Okay. Well, you have some
We
coverage
can,
in the app.
yeah,
Folks find you there.
bets on the app, segments on Action Network's YouTube channel breaking down these two fights in depth, and also Subriel Matias versus Liam Paro fight in Puerto Rico. That's going to go on this weekend. I'm Puerto Rican, so I had to cover that one. And also written previews on Action Network as well for all these fights that I'm talking about.
Love it. Brian Fonseca, Action Network boxing contributor. You can go now. We'll kick you out of here. Thanks for stopping by.
Thanks, guys.
Moving it right along to UFC Fight Night. Perez and Taira, the main event. Zarello and Billy ready to go. All right, Sean, we'll start with you. With Perez and Taira, when you evaluate the fight, you break it down. What's a plausible way of going about betting this fight?
I'm waiting for the price to keep ticking up on Perez. He opened closer to plus 145. I saw a plus 170 this morning, and I'm going to see if it gets all the way up to plus 200 once you get more Japanese money coming in. Parlays start getting tied together. I think Taira is a guy with a ton of hype, and I would expect people to keep betting on him, but also you have an entire country of bettors potentially moving that market offshore. So curious to see where this line moves by fight time. It will be late on Saturday night, so Japanese fans will be able to tune into this one, but it'll be past midnight. So going to give this a bunch of time to see where this line moves. In terms of pre-fight props that I find value on, Perez by knockout at plus 430, Taira by submission at plus 145. I think Perez is the better striker. I think Taira is very hittable and open defensively. We've seen him get hurt in the past. Perez can crack, and across a 25-minute fight, I think Perez is going to have opportunities to hurt him. Taira has not been in a 25-minute fight. This will be his first 5-round test. I don't really have many concerns about his ability to get the 5 rounds. He seems like he measures himself and paces himself well, gets his fights turned into grappling matches where he's able to control his opponents and keep his energy low for extended stretches. So I'm not that concerned about Taira getting a 5-round fight here. If Perez had fought Muhammad Mokaev across 5 rounds, I think Perez wins that fight, because I have real concerns about Muhammad Mokaev across a 5-round fight. And stylistically, this is kind of a similar matchup. Taira is longer, though. I think his scrambling is better. I think his jiu-jitsu is better than Mokaev. I think Mokaev might be the better wrestler, but Taira's jiu-jitsu and his control game is better than Mokaev's. And in particular, he's really good at taking the back and holding the back, and that is a weakness for Alex Perez. He gives up his back, gives up the rear naked choke, and that is how Taira wins this fight, either with extended ground control, putting in the backpack, locking in a biated triangle for multiple rounds, getting a lot of control time, or finishing the fight via submission, because that is the one hole in Perez's game, has been submission defense. But that said, I think Perez is the better wrestler here. I think he's the better striker. And I think, as I said, Taira has major defensive holes in his striking game. I also don't really love Taira's offensive striking. He has good kicks, but I don't think his hands are particularly good. And he kind of reminds me of like a flyweight Chase Hooper. You know, that is like what I view Tatsuro Taira as. I don't think his striking is particularly great, but he can be relentless in terms of his pace and his pressure, and he's going to stay in your face and not go away. So bit of an odd fighter. You know, there are 2 other Japanese prospects, high-level prospects in the 125 and 135-pound divisions. Taira is not my favorite prospect in the 125-pound division. That would be Ray Saruya. I think he's the better Japanese prospect of the 2. I think Taira's gotten a lot of hype. He's young, but I don't think he's as good as the hype he's gotten. So I'm Perez or pass here on this fight. I think Taira has a lot to prove. I think he's taking a significant step up in competition. And I think as that line continues to tick towards Perez, I'm going to get more interested in betting the underdog here. So if I'm taking a pre-fight stab, it's probably Perez by KO at plus 430. But if you want to bet Taira by sub at plus 145, I'm not going to argue against it. I projected that line closer to plus 120.
Billy, Taira 8 years younger and has a 4.5-inch reach advantage. When you break this one down, you mentioned in your Action Network write-up, your Action Network UFC luck ratings, that you'd be willing to wait, as Sean kind of hit on there, to the price point to get to around you, Billy, would wait till plus 170. It's there right now. So is that a price point that you're willing to take a stab on Perez now?
I still haven't bet it. I think Sean is super sharp pointing out that we'll probably get even more late movement. And I thought the early week line was about right. So if we saw considerable movement either way, I was happy with it. Um, if I'm playing it pre-fight now and I haven't made this bet yet, I think I'm going Taira inside the distance. I really like that Sean brought up the Mokaev fight as a comparison because stylistically and statistically, they're somewhat similar fighters. Taira and Mokaev both super young, known as relentless grapplers, very similar. I think I went back and watched that Mokaev fight. You could make an argument that Perez won that third round and thus the fight. I mean, most people had it for Mokaev, but it wasn't clear, I wouldn't say. The thing that's different though about Tetsuro Taira, Mokaev is a guy who learned wrestling his whole life and then became an MMA fighter. And Mokaev will throw some punches, then he'll stop, and then he'll take a shot out of nowhere, and you can see it coming from a mile away because he kind of just sits down and goes for it. Tetsuro Taira started his career to be an MMA fighter. He came up through the Shudo system in Japan. He chained stuff together so well for someone at his age and level, where all of his takedowns are hidden behind strikes. His submission attempts come off of doing damage on the ground. He uses submissions as control positions then to hit you. It all flows together so much better than Mokaev that I think he'll be able to get Perez to the ground. If this were a straight up wrestling match, I don't think he would. But his MMA grappling and his ability to mix the martial arts, as we would say, is pretty high level, especially for a guy his age. I do worry about his striking. I'm banking a little bit on his striking continuing to improve because it did look better last fight than it had before, and that fight looks a little bit better than the fight before, which, you can see how that one goes down. Don't love it. The reason I'm going Taira inside the distance, though, is this is the third fight in barely over 2 months for Alex Perez. I don't think he's taken a ton of damage in those fights. He has the loss to Mokaev, which was grueling. This is a big dude cutting to 125 3 times in this short of a time frame, going through those training camps. Even if you don't get beat up in the fight, stuff happens in camp. 32 years old, as Brennan pointed out. I don't know what his durability is going to be like down the stretch. He's been scheduled for 5 round fights, never actually made it to him. And if he's trying to keep up with Taira in the grappling and then switching gears and all those scrambles, I like Taira a lot down the stretch. So I think if he gets a finish, it will probably be late, which also makes him a live option for me. Haven't done any of this yet. I might still hedge with a Alex Perez early pick or Alex Perez in the first 3 rounds or the knockout prop, then try to come in on Taira late if you're watching this one live. But as far as a pre-fight side, I like Taira to get the finish with it probably coming late. Sub makes more sense, but I could see him getting down there, wrapping up a gift wrap or a control position, then kind of just finishing a tired Alex Perez with strikes.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about the activity level for Perez, the fact that he has gone so long without fighting, right? His huge stretches of long layoffs, and now he's fighting for the third time in 3 months or third time in 5 months. And that to me was both a good and a bad sign because he has to cut weight for a third time, which you mentioned, like could drain his durability. But in the same respect, it's good to see him active. It's good to see him healthy and feeling good and trying to rise back up the rankings. So yeah, I think Alex Perez is consistently underrated. He's one of the most well-rounded fighters in the division, but he has those durability issues, and Taira's young and, hungrier, and we'll see how much improvement he's made. I think he does need to have leveled up his striking to be competitive here in the striking. Otherwise, I think he could get clipped real bad.
But he just needs to survive the striking, right? He doesn't need to win the striking match. So I'm betting on him leveling up enough that he won't die on the feet. That's all I'm asking. You don't need to win this.
What was so goofy about the Mokaev fight is every time Mokaev was in trouble, he was just sitting down. He was like crouching to his ankles, and the judges didn't know what to do with it because it was like, did Perez hurt him and he sat down, or did he just sit down? And I think if Perez was slightly more aggressive with his hands in the third round, he wins that fight. If he had thrown like 5 more strikes, he wins that fight. But he was doing a lot of cornering Mokaev, pressuring him into corners, and then just staring at him and taking pictures and wasn't letting his hands go. And that was the difference in the fight. If he, literally throws 5 more strikes, I think he wins. So it was a very, very, very close fight, on a razor's edge, but just didn't do quite enough activity. And maybe the younger guy in a 5-round fight is going to pose more problems just because of that work rate level. So we'll see. But he was definitely looking better than Mokaev at the end of that 3-round fight. But yeah, they were both feeling it for the pace for sure.
And that's what I think is the difference with Taira here. Even relative to Perez, he's better at transitioning between the arts. Certainly better than Mokaev. Who Mokaev is like, we're boxing. Oh, I'm going to sit down and hope you wrestle with me. where Perez seemed so concerned with the wrestling that he couldn't really mix between those two things too. Where Taira, again, Perez was a JUCO wrestler, high school wrestling coach, who then got into MMA. Taira has been mixing these things his whole career since he was 12 or whatever. There's an advantage to that where you're switching gears a lot more seamlessly, and I think that's going to be a big deciding factor here.
Sure.
All right, very good. Let's move on to Billy and Sean's fight of the night. Correct me if I'm wrong. Rarely do we see you guys target a prelim as your fight of the night. It's the flyweight matchup here between Tagir Ulanbekov and Joshua Van. Price points are very similar to the main event as far as the money line prices. Van is the underdog at plus 170. Sean, break it down for us how you see each fighter and how they match up and how you might want to bet it.
Yeah, flyweight main event. We're going to go with a flyweight fight of the night as well. I think this is a really interesting matchup, and Joshua Van is a very dynamic prospect. He's one of the best offensive strikers already in the flyweight division, but he has major holes defensively, both in terms of his defensive striking, but also his defensive grappling. You can take him down, you can grapple him. I believe he was submitted in his only career loss, but Tagir Ulanbekov is the kind of guy who's going to push that grappling heavy game plan against him, and we'll see if Van can scramble and get back up and work his way back into the fight. So I expect Ulanbekov to have more success early when they're both dry in the first round. I expect him to land takedowns. And then from there, we'll see how scrambly Van is, how he's able to get back to his feet consistently, and whether he can do it more often as the fight goes along. Because I think he has better cardio. Ulanbekov typically slows down in the third round. Van is going to hit the body as well, which will slow Ulanbekov down even further. So this is, his first real test against a serious grappler. He keeps getting fed strikers. The strikers have been able to grapple him, but he gets back up and eventually hits their body and works them down. But Ulanbekov can maintain that grappling heavy game plan. He comes from Eagle MMA, which was Khabib's camp, Khabib's father's camp. So he trained with all those guys his whole life. He has that Sambo style where he's going to try to just take you down and consolidate position and wet blanket you for 15 minutes if he can. So I'm targeting Van live after round one. I think round one could be tough for him. I think he'll get taken down a couple times. But round two and beyond, I would expect him to start having more success, potentially denying those takedowns or just scrambling back to his feet. And I think by the third round, he may really be putting the volume on Ulanbekov, potentially getting a round three finish. So round three or decision on Van at plus 300, I think is an interesting bet. I think his round three odds are probably interesting as well. But I'm probably just going to bet him live after round one. And I like the over goes to the decision as well. I think you could get a very competitive split decision here. If somebody finishes, it's likely Ulanbekov via sub, and I think more likely Van via third round KO. So that Van round three or decision bet at plus 300 was interesting, but I think goes to decision and Van live are my favorite ways to play this one.
How about you, Billy?
Yeah, I mean, my thoughts are similar. It doesn't seem like a big enough disparity between his plus 180 money line to get that round three or decision. We're threading too tight of a needle for not enough of a payoff there. I looked at that too and I'm with you in the analysis. I was hoping we'd get a better price. But it's interesting. This one, in a way, could be the main event, right? It's another very young flyweight prospect against an established guy. It's really similar to that fight, except this time the younger fighter is the underdog. And again, it's another situation where it's not the striking we're worried about, but the grappling defense for Van. You have to project some level of advancement. He's not even 23 years old yet, only a few fights in the UFC. You have to assume he's continuing to get better, but it's really hard to say how much better, which is challenging. What ultimately tipped me towards Van, and I'm playing his money line at plus 180, is the times he has been taken down, he's never really rested. He's never given a guy a solid position. It's been like less than a minute of ground control time every time he has hit the mat. And he lands over 9 significant strikes per minute. So my thought here is Tagir's going to get his takedowns. Not a guy who throws a ton of strikes from the ground. Not a guy who's going to do a lot of damage there. Tagir could have 3-4 takedowns in a round, control the round for half the time. But if Van gets up and lands more strikes, I'm kind of banking on judges awarding him that. I don't know that that's going to be the case. It feels like close to a coin flip in my head how that's going to go. But again, we're flipping a coin where one side's plus 180. That feels pretty straightforward to me. It's not a huge bet for me. A lot of uncertainty when we're banking on the progression of this guy. I like his ability to get back up. He had a nice reversal one of the times on the ground too, where he finished the round on top. One of the times he was taken down. And we only think that's going to get better. I also don't love the anthropomorphic dynamics here for Ulanbekov, the tall, skinny guy. Going to be hard for him to get inside and get those takedowns on Van, who is throwing to the body and does keep a low level. So that's going to make it a little bit harder than it would be against other fighters. Plus 180 on Van, I like. Live is also a great angle. Not a card that I expect everyone to be at the edge of their seats watching, though. So I want to make sure we're giving out pre-fight picks as well here.
Okay, very good. By the way, main card available on ESPN2. Prelims at 7 Eastern, and main card starts at 10 Eastern, ESPN2 for UFC Fight Night 96. Okay, let's move on to Underdogs. Zerillo, good week for dogs. I know you were loving Underdogs last week.
Yeah, Underdogs didn't really come through last week, though. If you did play all the Underdogs that Billy and I recommended, I think you would have come out ahead ultimately, because you got Dom Reyes in there at +2XX. You got Billy's Underdog that cashed. And I think 3 of the 8 cash. And ultimately, I do think you would have come out ahead had you bet all of them evenly. Denise Gomez ended up cashing. So hopefully this week, a little bit more dog heavy. We will see. There's 4 that I circled that I like. We're going to run down them quickly. So Adam Fugit at +103 against Josh Quinlan. He won the first round on 2 or 3 scorecards against Michael Morales. I think he's gotten a pretty tough schedule to date in the UFC. And he's been training for the past year with Kelvin Gastelum. He moved camps, moved to Fight Ready MMA in Arizona, and he's been training directly with Kevin Gastelum like every single day. There's no way he didn't get better working with a pretty solid top 5 welterweight. So he's the better wrestler with the better cardio in this matchup. I think Quinlan can crack. I think Quinlan is likelier to win the fight early in round 1. That aligns with a bet that Billy made on this fight. I know Billy likes violence in this matchup, but I just prefer Fugit's cardio. And if this one extends, I think he's likelier to land more takedowns or more significant strikes. I should also mention Quinlan coming off of a February loss to Danny Barlow, where he took a ton of damage. Round 3 KO, but just got hit in the face 100 times, even before that knockout. So relatively quick turnaround, a few months later off of a knockout loss for Quinlan as well. Just worth noting, Fugit had that full year off, new training camp, got to rest the brain. So Fugit at plus money, and I think live after round 1 of the ways that attack that. Wilson at +280 against Jack Asaragi. Wilson is not a good fighter, but neither is Jack Asaragi. And Wilson is taller, he's longer, he's 5 inches taller, he has a 4-inch reach advantage. He is the better MMA fighter here. Asaragi can crack. Asaragi was a +390 underdog in his last fight, which he won via knockout. Nobody was giving a chance to win in that fight because in his previous fight, he showed against another low-level prospect he cannot grapple at all. Like, really bad grappler, like potentially one of the worst grapplers in the UFC bad. You can't be laying -300+ on a guy who can't grapple in an MMA fight. I don't care how bad Weston Wilson's chin is. He's bigger. He's the better MMA fighter. He's the better minute winner. If Jekka doesn't knock him out, I think Wilson is very live at +280. So if he dies, he dies. No big deal. But I think he's live in this fight. Lucas Almeida at +170 against Tim Kwamba. Kwamba's a local kid. We'll see what the crowd sounds like at the Apex for him, because for his Contender Series fights, really loud. A lot of fans there, but the UFC has those new ticketing rules now for fighters at the Apex. I think they only get like 3 or 4 fans at most, in to watch their fight, and then they get shuttled out right after. So I don't know if the crowd is going to be as loud for Kwamba as it was for those other Apex fights. But even beyond that, I don't really know what he does well. He's this well-rounded guy with a decent skill set, but he's low volume. He seems to hunt the finish, even though he doesn't have a ton of power. He seems like a good athlete, and I said he's well-rounded, but I don't really know what he does well. Durability, survivability, the ability to survive 15 minutes and just not go away. That helps him in this fight because he's the more durable fighter than Lucas Almeida, but I think Almeida is equally, if not more skilled, and this is a significant step down in competition for Almeida relative to his previous fight. So +170 on Almeida, I think, is interesting. I don't love it, but I really don't like Tim Kwamba, the fighter. And then lastly, Jose Johnson at +475, the biggest underdog on the card. This is closer to +400 offshore. The domestic books are a little bit more juiced on Johnson. He would be the tallest 125er in UFC history if he makes the weight today. We'll see if he makes the weight, but he'd be a 6-foot flyweight. We've never had a guy over 5'10" in the flyweight division. So a huge flyweight. He'd be 8 inches taller with a 6-inch reach advantage against his opponent. Now, he struggles to defend takedowns, but he's really good at putting in those butterfly hooks and scrambling and getting back to his feet. And Asuo Mabayev, for all of his takedown and wrestling ability, is really bad at controlling guys on the ground. It's hard to control guys on the ground at 125. You just don't have enough weight to keep them down. Yet, in the fact that Johnson is double his size, I think it's going to be really difficult to keep Jose Johnson on the ground. And once they're on the feet, Johnson is the much longer man. He's probably going to land more volume. So this could be a wonky split decision where Almabayev is landing takedowns in every round, but when they return to the feet, Johnson is landing more strikes. So Jose Johnson at plus 475, absolutely live this weekend as the biggest underdog on the card, and somebody I will be finding a way to bet once we see the weigh-ins on Friday. I need to make sure he doesn't look like Skeletor on the scales once I see him weigh in. But yeah, biggest flyweight in UFC history should be interesting.
Billy, you echo the sentiments of Zerillo for one, but you have another underdog if you want to comment on Fugit.
Yeah, if I had to take a money line side in that fight, 100% on Fugit. I almost bet it earlier in the week. It seems to be trending towards Quinlan. So if it goes any further, I'm just going to double down on this fight and take Fugit as well. But I already have a different pick for that one. As to the Jose Johnson fight, not sure I'm betting that, but anyone who's looking up stats on UFC fights and you see a guy with 7, 8, 9 takedowns in a round, that means he let the guy up a handful of times in there. I can't keep taking you down if I hold you down the whole time. So people will get excited about a fighter because they landed 9 takedowns in 2 rounds or whatever. It's like, that means the guy got up at least 7 times because, started on the feet 2 of those times. Just keep that in mind. Definitely get the logic from Sean on that one. Not sure I can pull the trigger, but it makes a lot of sense. The one I'm on, and this is mostly just going to be a shameless plug for my luck ratings, is Julia Pilastri. Bet her at plus 190 early in the week. She's all the way down to plus 155. This is a classic, fights more than 3-1 to go to the decision. We're getting the underdog at plus 190, or we're at plus 190. Still plus 155 is playable. Lower level UFC fight by any stretch. Josephine Knudsen 7-0. Only one of those wins is in the UFC. It was against Marnik Mann, who has no business being in the UFC. Kind of fought, broadly speaking, lower level competition. And it was a former kickboxer. Pilastri's got much more finishing upside here. Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu fighter, primarily. You got the finishing upside. You got the chances that the judges just hand her one, even if she doesn't totally deserve it. You're getting that at plus 190. I thought getting CLV on this one was pretty obvious earlier in the week. I'd still take it here, but again, friendly reminder, check those pieces out earlier in the week. I was in the wrong on one of those that we're going to debate in our best bet segment, but this one I'm going to gloat about my CLV a little bit.
Okay, excellent. How about the prop market, Zerillo? I know you had some stronger thoughts on a particular fight that really allowed you to go into different layers of our breakdown, our rundown, but you're kind of bouncing around it this week.
Yeah, Nate Maness versus Jimmy Flick. Jimmy Flick had previously retired, came back to the UFC because he needed some money, and he was getting demolished by Malcolm Gordon before Gordon ultimately made a mistake and jumped into a submission. And Flick is basically submission or bust in every one of his fights. I'm not trying to wiki cap this, but 15 of his 17 wins are by submission and 6 of his 7 losses are by knockout. He is submission or bust. And just watching that Malcolm Gordon fight, Brendan, I could throw you in the octagon and give you a free shot on Jimmy Flick, and I think you can knock him out. I'm being dead serious. I don't know how much you weigh, Brendan, but Jimmy Flick, even at 125 pounds, even if you have a weight advantage on him, I'm pretty sure you could crack him and knock him out. He has a bad chin, like a real bad chin, and his reactions every time he gets hit are really bad. He's dancing like a baby deer in the octagon. So he can absolutely find a submission here. Nate Maness is a bit reckless, but Maness is the much bigger guy. He's 3 inches taller. He has a 4-inch reach advantage. He hits much harder. He showed that he has good grappling awareness against Umar Nurmagomedov. I think everybody bet Umar inside the distance in that fight. Nate survived for all 15 minutes as a pretty big underdog, but he should be able to counter grapple, keep this one on the feet, and then eventually find the knockout on Jimmy Flick. So Maness in round 1, minus 105 is interesting. I like Maness round 1 or 2, probably minus 105, plus 430 respectively. You can probably structure those so that you profit no matter what happens. But also the under 1.5 at minus 200 or Maness by KO at minus 200, I think, are ways to play it as well. You just get the 15 minutes across with Maness by KO, or you get the Flick submission equity in there for the 7.5 minutes of the fight. Most of his fights tend to end inside that 7.5 minute mark. He has been a decision a couple times, been finished in round 3 a couple times, but Flick comes forward. They're in the apex. It's going to be a car crash, and I expect Maness to put him away pretty quickly. So even the under half around here, I think, could be interesting as well.
Me against Flick could get a lot of viewership maybe on our Action Network YouTube page for
I think you can get him, Brendan. One clean shot.
I hope so.
You just got to avoid the submission, but if you get him at the first punch, it's over.
I'm a buck
6 months of
85,
sprawl
so
training. We need our 6 months of sprawl training in there, and it'll be all right.
He's
I
what,
don't know. Flick has those
5'7"?
flying submissions. So I don't know. I don't know how you like. I don't know if the sprawl training is what I'm as concerned about because he doesn't have good wrestling. We need to just back away. Just back away unless you're gonna
Arms in
punch.
tight.
Just back
Arms in
away.
tight.
Keep that high guard. Keep those elbows tight. Don't let him grab on anything, and just crack him one time.
My problem is
Sorry.
I'll probably hurt my hand or something because I don't.
TKO injury via broken hand.
Yeah. Well, I won't get into it, but it happened to be one. I wasn't like a fighter in college, okay, but like I had a scrum with someone
Ooh.
on a bad night. Well, they were being
Ooh.
very rude to my friend and my girlfriend at the time. So
Did what you got to do.
stood up for them. I felt like a hero. Next morning when I was in the down the street at the hospital trying to get the hand wrapped, it wasn't great. Anyway, Billy, props for you this week.
Yeah, we alluded to it earlier, the Josh Quinlan Adam Fugit fight. I like this fight to end by knockout at -130. Not enough of a price difference from the Fugit money line for me, where I think it probably should be. I'm just rolling with that. Both guys are glass cannons. Quinlan lands about 4 significant strikes per minute, takes almost 7. Fugit also has a negative striking differential. Knocked down twice by Michael Morales, knocked down once by proper Mike Malott. Quinlan, 2 knockout, really 3 knockout or 2 knockout wins because one was a no contest that was overturned. Different story. And when he doesn't get the knockout, he gets knocked out. So both guys extremely violent. Both guys not a lot of interest in defense. Leaning towards Fugit. Obviously, you could combine both our thoughts here and play Fugit by knockout at a juicy plus money and try to thread the needle. I just think I've never really seen either guy go for a submission or try to grapple or try to do anything other than just swing and hope the other guy falls down first. -130 feels like a pretty fair price on that.
Oddly enough, they're both BJJ black belts. So grappling could be fun here. Like they both have the black belt. I'd be curious to see who has the legit black belt and who has the fake black belt. But
Alex Bahia got a BJJ black belt
exactly
for knocking out Jamal Hill. So like,
so one of their black belts is probably a little bit more legitimate than the other, and I tend to think it's Fugit's, especially given the camp he's been training with over the past year plus. So I think Fugit's the better fighter, and I think if one of them has grappling success, it's likely to be him. And I trust his cardio too. So Fugit live after round 1 may be the best entry, just because I think Quinlan will be more dangerous for 5 minutes, and then his effectiveness really drops off.
Mm-hmm.
All right, to take us home, best bets, a head-to-head best bet.
Yeah,
this is not a final bet, or really a best bet. It's a head-to-head.
Yeah, it's a little head-to-head debate. We've given out enough bets on this show that are either aligned or giving you enough options. So let's go with a little head-to-head battle on this final bet of the night. So I bet Garrett Armfield at -180. The rest of the market was at -190 to -195, and I've seen people talking about Garrett Armfield enough to know that this line was only going one direction from -180, which was up. So this was partially a bet knowing I get CLV on it because of where the market was headed. But number 2, I just like the matchup for Garrett Armfield. And I know Billy's going to discuss he stands grappling upside of plus money and the fact that he thinks that could play out closer to a coin flip. So my issue with Brady Heastand and with guys like Cody Stamen and other fighters of that ilk is they can wrestle and they can get takedowns, but they're not going to do enough damage with those takedowns to win the fight. I think the way MMA fights are scored now, fighters like Michael Chiesa, who is from the same gym as Brady Heastand, it's like Jiu-Jitsu. It's Chiesa and Heastand and Juliana Pena. So they're well-trained fighters, but there's not a ton of pros in that gym. And the issue with Chiesa and Heastand, who are very similar fighters, I believe Chiesa was Heastand's wrestling coach in high school. Mm-hmm. They get the takedowns, but they don't do anything with them. And Heastand has, I believe, 20 minutes of grappling control time already in the UFC. He's landed 10 ground strikes. He doesn't throw anything on the ground. He looks for submissions, but he's not active enough with the takedowns. And Billy and I discussed another fight earlier, the Josh Van Tagir-Ulanbekov fight, where we mentioned that Tagir may get the takedowns, but Van is going to pop back up and land the strikes. And Van at big plus money, okay, like easy argument there to bet him at plus money. I'm laying juice on a guy who I think could get taken down, but when they pop back to the feet, he's going to double or triple up Heastand on strikes. I don't like Heastand's striking defense. I think Armfield is the much better technical striker. I think he throws much more volume. He can absolutely spend time on his back in this fight. I think Brady's a really good wrestler. He's probably going to land takedowns here, and Armfield's been taken down in the past. But I don't know what he's going to do with those takedowns. I think he needs to finish the fight via submission. And if I was betting Billy's side, I think I'd rather bet Brady via submission than taking his money line, because I think that's his likeliest win condition with those takedowns. If he's getting the takedowns and not doing anything with them, I think he's going to leave too much room for Armfield to pop back up and land the damaging strikes and win at least 2 of these 3 rounds. So the last thing I'll mention, Heastand withdrew from his last 2 fights with staph infection against the Mon Blackshear, then 5 months later against Rinya Nakamura. This is his first fight back. So I think Armfield being more active, being healthy the last time we saw him, throwing all those strikes, beat Brad Katona, who I know Billy doesn't like because Billy bet against Brad Katona last week. But that, that was an upset win for Armfield in Canada. So he's proven that he can get taken down 4 times, pop back up, and land 100+ strikes. He did it against Katona. I think Heastand a better wrestler, a lesser striker than Katona, so a bit more one-dimensional. And the last time Armfield fought, more of a one-dimensional grappler, he knocked him out. So I think he wins by knockout. I could see the path for Heastand, but I would just prefer to bet him by sub if I was betting the other side. So Armfield up to about -190, -200 for me.
Okay, Billy, why does the other side make more sense to you?
So before I dive into that, because I was bragging about my CLV earlier, got to take the L on this one. I actually bet Heastand at a slightly worse line. So check out my ratings. You can see what I took that one at. Full disclosure, I'm going to tell you when I got it right, tell you when I got it wrong. With that said,
you're fair.
Sean typically does. We both see both sides of this, and he made some of my points for me and talked about some of the things I'm worried about. Heastand looks so uncomfortable in the striking. Like it's not bad. He just doesn't look like he wants to be there. But it's the smaller cage. He's fighting a guy who's been taken down a bunch of times. His last fight against Dana Batjerai, however we're saying that, changes every fight. He did land a lot more ground strikes. I don't know how they only credit him with 4. He finished TKO via ground and pound, where he landed like 20 hammer fists on the ground. There's 2 ways you can view that fight. One is Heastand was getting beat up, pulled a miracle submission again, or pulled a miracle finish and takedown against a tired guy at the end. That's a totally reasonable way to view that, because he was getting hurt on the feet, able to find the takedown, do what he needed to do at the end. The other view is this is a guy who's got good cardio, fairly good durability, and is going to fight for your money all 15 minutes, because he was down 2-0 and finished that fight with less than 40 seconds on the clock. That's the kind of guy I want to bet at plus money. And similar to the early fight we were talking about, I'm taking the underdog in both of those fights. I don't know how the judges are going to handle it when we've got one guy doing more control and one guy doing more damage on the feet. It seems to vary by state, by fight, by which particular judge we're getting. And again, when there's that uncertainty, that's just where I want the plus money. And the nice thing for our personal, rivalry debate, whatever here, if my pick loses, I can say I had the plus money guy. Of course he lost. If you win, what are you going to do, Tarillo? You've got nothing to come back at me with. So
lose for me, for sure.
Yeah, there you go. A little bit of house money. There's one a couple weeks ago where I bet 2 guys at like plus 105 and you're on the other side. I'm like, made, 1/20th of a unit, I win. So obviously kidding with that part. I took him at a worse price. Wish I would have waited. I think at this price, I just like the money line. He can finish those ground and pounds. Also another young guy, not even 25 or just turned 25.
Yeah, they're both young now.
Have to imagine he's better than his last fight. Final point. If you told me by getting staph infection, I could avoid a fight with Rinya Nakamura and get Garrett Armfield instead, I would take that deal any day of the week. So great career move by Brady Heastand.
Fair enough, yeah.
So how about, never mind, you're going head to head. I think the loser should have to wear their hat forwards next week.
Oh, wow.
That is a punishment worse than death, Brendan. I don't know if I can pull off the
stakes right there, but
yeah, because if you're watching on YouTube, many of you do. We're all wearing a backwards hat today. It's summertime.
Gotta keep it going. Gotta keep the streak going.
So that's just my thought. Or no hat at all. But Billy, that would ruin the fun, because Billy doesn't normally wear a hat. So maybe a hat forward just to mix it up, throw a wrinkle in there. We'll think about it. All right. Very good. Sean Zerillo, Billy Ward, find those guys in the app. Should they have anything before Saturday evening for UFC Fight Night 96? Yeah, keep an eye on those guys in the app. Find Billy's write-up, Sean Zerillo's write-ups over on the website. Billy has the luck ratings from earlier in the week. Use that at your convenience. And again, we'll be back next week, we're heading to Saudi Arabia for UFC next week. So we'll be here to break it all down next Friday morning. That'll conclude our podcast for Zerillo and Billy Ward. Brendan Glasheen, thanks for tuning in to our UFC betting preview here on the Action Network podcast. We are presented by BetMGM. Have a great weekend.